Hey folks, Rob here bringing another video. This one's going to be a new series. It's going to be called Tactics 101. This is just going to be a basic intro to certain unique aspects. We're going to start with carriers and half tracks because they're treated almost the same. And the series, like I said, is going to focus on one or two little unique pieces of equipment and basically how to use them and utilize them. So let's get into it. So we're going to cover what is a half track, some of the limitations and uses, attacks on a half track, attacking with a half track, and then lastly we look at carriers. So just a refresher on some terms. If you ever see a capital HT, that means heavy tank. It's a lowercase ht for half tracks. And carriers are basically, when you dismount, typically you're done with a half squat, and there's no inherent crew. The half squat is the crew, and it gives you a little bit more flexibility. Typically these are found in the British Orders of Battle. So there's a couple of articles you can look at. One is in Journal 5, and that is the Heads Up, Heads Down by Ian Daglish. It's more or less just talking about how to put counters on your half tracks when different things happen to them. Because again, with the inherent crew, that can also suffer certain effects. You want to have your counters in the right order so that your opponent knows exactly what's supposed to have happened. And the other one is Recon by Fire number 2. This has a good article in Mechanized Blitz and ASL dealing with half tracks. Now, I don't have this. I was going to order it, but it's like 30 bucks from Ritter Creek. However, they're going to charge me 80 bucks for shipping, so that's not going to happen. So I'm going to just mention it. If you have access to this product, apparently has quite a good article on half tracks from what I read on Game Squad. All right, so what is a half track? Half tracks are basically represented by a counterpiece, which has a white oval and a white circle on it. If it's a full oval, that means it's fully tracked AFV. If it's two circles, it's a wheeled vehicle, etc. All these symbols mean different things. And second thing you want to look at is the armor components, if it has any. In this case, this SDKFZ1 only has stars for armor, which means it's an unarmored vehicle. Therefore, not going to apply most of what we talk about. But you look at the 251-1, it does have one armor classes, then therefore it means that it's armed and armored because it has a weapon as well. Now there's variants to the half tracks. Most of them are on the American side. They have a whack load, anything from mortars to the quad 50s to just plain old troop carrying half tracks. And again, just remember that even 0 qualifies as an armor factor, so that would still make this one an AFV. Well, this one would not be considered an AFV. So just remember that when it comes to the counter contents. Half tracks are typically always going to be open topped, and the ones we're going to be focusing on are the armored variety, not so much these. These are treated like trucks much, except it's better mobility cross country because of the tracks. However, we're not going to focus too much effort on the unarmored variants, just the armed ones. Crews and passengers will share the same fate. So one more difference between the two here on the left is we have on the back, you can see it's a lowercase cs. That means that only the crew does not exist. It's just inherent, and it's only the passengers, if any, that will have to do the crew survival check. If you contrast that with a capital CS, that means that the inherent crew has a possibility of living if the half track is destroyed, again, barring close combat or a flame. The crew itself has its own survival number, and then the passengers, assuming they survived any kind of collateral fire, will be able to take their own chances of living through the vehicle being destroyed. And typically, crews and passengers can share the same fate, or they can be a little bit different. So normally, if the crew of the half track is going to be buttoned up, the passengers are as well. However, if the crew is crew exposed, the passengers can stay buttoned up, they can stay unbuttoned, and variants thereof. When crews are impacted by results, typically they're stunned or pinned, whereas passengers can be even broken or KIA'd, again, depending on the kind of attack that is going against the vehicle. Given the nature of the truck, you also have to be crew exposed in order to fire, contribute to CC, or even observe or direct or spot for other fires. You have to be crew exposed. Now, the default setting is always going to be crew exposed. Whenever you have a white silhouette, it means it's open topped. Contrast that with the other SDKFZ one, and or 7, I should say. It is most half tracks you're going to see are going to be open top silhouette, and you must be CE as a passenger in order to contribute. And we're going to get into those specifics. The good thing about half tracks is, especially the armored variants, less so the unarmored ones, is it does give you a little modicum of protection. If you're buttoned up as a passenger on a half track, you can share the invulnerability to small arms fire, because small arms fire cannot attack even with the 0 armor factors and AFE. Machine guns, ATRs, anti-tank weapons obviously could, ordnance, but not inherent small arms fire from squads. So being able to drive around in one of these things, you have a decent amount of move. You have armor, which keeps you safe to get to where you want to get. A lot of benefits to be using half tracks. Now, there's exceptions that change the rule for half tracks when it comes to being buttoned up status, and that is things like airburst and height advantage. So if you're unlucky enough to be parked in a tree mounted up, and you get an HE, OBA, or a mortar that goes off in the trees, gets that airburst effect, it basically is going to end up negating or reducing your standard CE TEM, which is typically it's +2. Some of the half tracks have up armored fronts, and they'll have like a 3 in the front maybe, but typically you're going to get the +2 for the crew exposed TEM bonus. And the other one that's going to negate your button-up status is triple point blank fire. So this happens when somebody's in your hex, enemy infantry, and they're attacking you, they're tossing grenades and shit. You're not going to be protected by the armor around you. All right, so AFEs and unarmored AFEs as well, their crews have the same morale as either a elite unbroken unit for the AFE variant, or the first line for the unarmored variant, like this one up here. As we said, most of them also have some kind of armament, like an AMG, maybe a quad 50 or something along those lines, and you must be CE. The crew must be CE to fire. The passengers cannot fire the anti-air machine gun. It must be the crew. So if you button up your crew, it's not going to be able to contribute to any kind of fire group, which is another real benefit to the half track. Because an armored half track could be reduced to the status of an unarmored one, given height advantage and air burst, the crew will be subject to results you normally don't see. Things like pins, morale checks, K, could even be KIA'd, while the passengers may suffer a different result, in which case the crew would be dead, vehicle abandoned, and then the passengers are left to their fate. Because of the airburst and height advantage potential, should your unit break, your crew break, they must route out of the vehicle. So there's a chance for the crew to bail out while the passengers maybe are fine, they survived their morale check, but the crew itself did not, so they have to bail out. The only time that the passengers have to leave if they've been broken is if the crew is either eliminated or if the AFE becomes abandoned, things like that. That's the only reason why your broken passengers will have to vacate the vehicle. Otherwise, they can stay on there. Even if you're in a hex with enemy units, they do not have to retreat as long as the crew is fine with the half track. Again, because of the height advantage and air burst, half tracks turn into basically unarmored variants, and that means they can be attacked on the vehicle line of the IFT, or require a to kill number from ordnance, depending again as first an unarmored vehicle as opposed to an armored one. Just remember that when you're approaching enemy units, if they have any kind of height advantage to you, say they're on the second floor of a building, don't park yourself adjacent to them on the ground floor, because you've just given up all your protections. Now, passengers always use their own morale Again, we said, like in this particular case, the Germans have morale of 8 for the crew, whereas these guys would be a 7. Same with the Americans. The elite first line units for the Americans are 7s, so they have the same morale in this particular case. Passengers always use your own morale. So if you have a 10-2 leader with your squad, the passengers can use the 10-2 leader, not the crew. But passengers always use their own morale. Another good benefit to passengers in a half track, again, the armor variant, the open topped, is that their firepower is not going to be half like it would if you were a truck passenger. So, again, say we have a 468 squad in this unarmored variant, they would have to pay mobility fire penalty, which is half firepower, in addition to if you fire bounding fire, you'll be halved again. But a half track will not, or an armored half track will not have to pay that penalty. You don't have the mobility bonus, just any kind of bounding fire penalties that you may have. And then lastly, the crew exposed and button up status must be done as per a crew would do it. So you're limited to 1 time per phase. So you could go hatches down in the movement phase, and then in the advanced phase, you become unbuttoned. But you cannot do it twice in one phase. So if you want to skirt some dangerous area, for example, so you go buttoned up, you move, then you become unbuttoned, you can't do that. Right. So this is from the Ponderous book of ASL Playaids. It's quite a handy download you can get from Texas-ASL. It's just that it's a bunch of cheat sheets, about 60, 70 pages long. This one here has 2 pages on half tracks. Now the one on the left, less relevant for us right now. This is more or less terrain cost for driving a half track. They pulled away all the other vehicle types and just used half tracks, so there's that. But the one we really want to focus on is the one to the right, the half track cheat sheet. This summarizes all the information you're going to need for half tracks, and including on the bottom right here, we have by nationality. So German, US, British, which is typically using Lend-Lease half tracks from the Americans, although they do have a lot of carriers. Free French are the same, and then of course you got the Polish Belgians having their variants as well. So with all that being said, why would you want to use half tracks? Because of the safety for transporting. So it's not as much mobility as a truck, movement wise. However, because it's a half track, it can cross country a lot better than a truck could, and it gives you a modicum of protection at the same time. Again, if you're buttoned up and it's an armored variant, then you share that invulnerability to small arms fire. Not going to affect you very much, or it's not going to help you very much if your opponent has bazookas and anti-tank guns, but it gives you some protection than just walking in the open. You can use them for bypassing and freezing units, depending on the attack and what's in that hex. May or may not be a good strategy, but it remains a possibility because it's an armored vehicle. You could do just that. You stay unbuttoned, you'd move into a hex. Generally speaking, the attacker not going to be able to target your half track very well. I mean, close combat is going to be a thing, but you're also protected by having an inherent squad or something as a passenger in the half track. You can also use it for towing ordnance and trailers. Now, trailers are typically extra ammo carriers, so you're going to see some half tracks like the STF KFZ 10.5, I think it was. That was in Stalingrad. That came out in Valor of the Guards. It is a mobile anti-air platform which carries a trailer. So there's certain things that half tracks can do that you typically wouldn't see on other things like trucks. You can also, if you've got towing capacity, tow guns around. So again, it fits 2 bills. You can carry your passengers with some safety, and you can tow ordnance around the map if you so have to. It's best to combine half tracks with some other kind of assault, so you have a true combined arms effect, like tanks, obviously. Having access to OBA and or fighter bombers is also another way to increase that protection. By themselves, they'll be okay, but they are still going to be vulnerable to some degree. You can use, provided the AAMG of the half track is being manned by the crew, they can contribute to any kind of fire group. CE leaders can direct the fire of that. So if you have a squad and the crew manning the anti-air and a leader, all of those can combine into a fire group. You could have multiple half tracks as long as they're all being manned AMGs. You can combine them all into fire groups and leader direct and what have you. So it's very, very versatile troop carrier. A lot of, especially the armored variants of half tracks, can be you can dismount LMGs from the back of the carrier. Troops dismount, they pull away the AMG, it turns into an LMG for you to use on the ground. It can no longer go back in the vehicle, but it's a way to provide extra guns to your troops. A good trick that Dave did one time was we're playing Crisis Kasserine. Americans have a lot of half tracks, and he dismounted, I think, 3 or 4 of them, 50 cals. So just like that, he gained 450 cals for his ground units, which is a lot of firepower. A lot better than using the AMG ability. It's dismounted as maybe a medium or heavy, or even a 50 cal, depending on the half track. And then 2 more points. Armored fighting vehicles in general always carried enough rearming weaponry to arm at least 1 half squad. So if you have a prisoner that's just been released, or for whatever reason you're an unarmed unit, and you have access to a half track, you are able to rearm yourself and become an armed half squad. Now this can only be done the one time, so once this happens, you got to mark the vehicle scrounged, so you can no longer draw weapons and ammo to rearm your units. And the biggest limitation of the half track is the armor. It's protected from small arms fire, but with a 0 or even a 1 armor protection is not a lot against any kind of anti-tank, especially in late wars. So if you have a 747 with the bazooka, you may not want to charge him as much as you'd like to, because you could end up losing all your eggs in one basket, as it were. All right, so let's look at attacking and armored half track. Now, we're not going to focus on the unarmored variants. Those are much treated like trucks. We're going to look at the actual AFV armored half track for the rest of this video. So again, if you're buttoned up, you can only typically be affected by direct fire. So it's got to be a to hit roll. And that can be from an MG, light anti-tank weapon, or a gun. Or you could be attacked by other things such as obviously aircraft, airburst. If there's a height advantage between you and your opponent, say he's up on the 2nd level and you're on the ground level, he has height advantage. He's able to look right into your half track. Therefore, you're effectively going to become an unarmed vehicle. And of course, close combat, because of the nature of the beast, they're tossing grenades back and forth. You're not going to get any kind of protection from your thing. But aside from those cases, you're going to be impervious to small arms inherent fire. Now, again, because of the to hit process, targeting the vehicle and such, the crews are typically only going to be stunned or pinned, again, unless you have height advantage or airburst, and that just ruins your day. That's when they can be attacked and or eliminated. Crew can remain CE, as they usually must, to man their anti-air and to gain things like road bonus to be crew exposed, while your passengers could stay buttoned up. Now, if your crew decides to button up for whatever reason, forced to because of an attack, then the passengers must stay buttoned up as well. So they somewhat share the fate of the vehicle, but at the same time, they can act independently in some cases. In those cases when a crew is affected by things other than a stun or a pin result, when you're actually rolling on the IFT for morale checks, etc., if they should become broken, they must leave the vehicle. So they spend all their route phase movement points moving beneath the vehicle. And if you have a unit in the back, like say, for example, you also had a passenger that was broken as well, once that crew leaves the vehicle, the passengers have to leave as well. Right? However, should the crew not be broken and having to route, a broken passenger can stay on it as long as they want. This half track can even move towards enemy. Normally, broken units do not move towards enemy; they have to run away. However, again, when you're in a half track, you can do that. So you still have mobility of the half track here and around broken units. These guys can rally as per normal. They'll still use DM, but will not be rally terrain, so they don't get the extra +1. But at least it keeps your broken units, again, somewhat protected. You could even move them closer to the battle, or drive them towards where one of your leaders are handy that can come onto the half track and help rally. So once more, the only time the passengers have to leave the half track is if the crew abandons the vehicle or is KIA'd themselves. Now, this comprehensive example is from Ian Daglish's article in Journal 5, and it goes through the different options that could occur. So if we look at sequence of events, and first of all, we'll deal with number 1 here. There's an IFT attack versus a crew exposed half track that results in a morale check. Now, the crew rolls an 8, which means that they're pinned, and therefore this pin is placed on the vehicle, and the crew can remain CE and fire the AMG. Now, they don't have to button up unless they become, again, broken or what have you. Being pinned CE crew doesn't impact you aside from the penalty of half firepower, etc., rates of fire. All that will be decreased when you're pinned. Now, in this particular example, the squad rolled a 7 as well, which means that they are also pinned. So you can be pinned in a mobile vehicle, given, again, depending on how the roll is. But the squad now has to button up once they become pinned. Now, pins always come off at the end of the turn. So once this pin is gone, then the crew and the passengers can resume whatever status that they had. In this case, the crew was CE, so the squad automatically will become CE. You don't have to move it up in the advanced phase. Now we look at the next turn. They got attacked again. This time they got a 1 result on the IFT, and they rolled the same numbers. In this case, a crew, because it was a direct fire attack from small arms fire, they can only suffer stun at pin results, so they suffer a stun because they failed. And the squad will break and they gain a DM. Now the vehicle is under the stun. The squad is under the DM. So again, you can quickly start building up counters, and they could have different effects against them depending on how they roll. In this case, the crew is stunned, and so they get a stun counter, but the squad itself broke. Now at the end of the turn, again, the stun gets flipped over to its other reverse side. So from now on, the crew is going to be affected by this. They're going to be buttoned up because of the effects of the stun. So the crew is going to be buttoned up, and the suffer the penalty from the stun. Again, this is just on the back of the counter. Whereas the squad itself will stay broken. So in the next turn, the German turn, you're going to try your rally phase. You can try a self-rally for here. The vehicle still suffers the stun results. This will never come off. And again, they stay buttoned up. And the squad itself will be buttoned up this whole time as well. Finally, we bring a leader on board. He's able to rally the squad, and therefore the squad's rally. But again, leaders cannot impact the crew. They're always going to be suffering the results of the stun. So just to show you that passengers and crew can share different statuses, whether they're buttoned up or CE, and the consequences of failing morale checks and pinning task checks, etc. You can see how that impacts the different parts of the vehicle. Now, if you look at attacking with a half track, now passengers must be CE in order to contribute any of their firepower. Again, because you don't pay the mobile penalty of having your firepower, it's quite effective, especially when you're talking your assault troops, 548s, 838s, that kind of thing, 747s, because of their assault fire capability. You throw on an anti-air machine gun, and it's quite deadly firepower that you could get on the attack. If, for example, you have 747 the back of American half track rolling into a German squad, you're going to have your probably tripled in half firepower from your 747. you throw on your 1.5 firepower from your anti-air gun, you're quickly going to be climbing up the columns here on the IFT table to do a quite lethal attack while you're gaining the protection of the half track. Now, some support weapons can be fired, including the Playaids, LMGs, mortars, that kind of stuff, thrown DCs. And your passengers can also contribute to the overrun. Now, they only had half their firepower, again, 1.5, so it's still a bit more than the native half track itself, again, depending on the situation when you want to actually do that. Now, some US and German half tracks, and again, this goes for Lend-Lease as well, do have the capability of arming the units with light anti-tank weapons, which they could fire. So they're carrying extra Shreks or Panzerfaust, so you can always fire those, bazookas, what have you, from the half track itself. Again, just gives you a really versatile mobile weapon platform. Now, in order for a multi-unit fire group to exist, you need to have manned AA machine guns from the vehicle. So you have the squad in the back of the half track, you have the half track itself, and then you have any other units. All those can be combined into fire groups as long as the AMGs are manned from the half tracks and contributing to that same fire group. Now, armor leaders will only ever affect the crew and or a passenger on the vehicle. So any other units in that same hex or adjacent will not be able to contribute if it's an armor leader. You contrast that with an infantry leader who can do those things. You can combine multi-units into fire groups using your leader bonus, etc. The only caveat, of course, is if the half track has moved that turn, then you're not able to use that ability. You can only affect the vehicle and the passengers. So if you want to move into one of your fire bases and then you want to do some advancing fire, you're not going to be able to direct that fire with your leader aboard a half track. Again, this Ponderous book of ASL Playaids, we look at that. It's got a nice lengthy cheat sheet, very good summary. Again, Texas-ASL has a lot of downloads. This is one of them. And it breaks down everything you need to know from the rule book and what we're just talking about on various aspects of it. And then it goes into detail in specifics. We're talking armored half tracks here generally. Again, all the American variants. And then we have the Lend-Lease down below that. All right, then lastly, we're going to look at carriers. Carriers are treated very much like a half track. Again, these are typically British in general. Let's bring one in. Here's a carrier MMGB. So again, you have your 1 portage points that you can carry. You have an inherent crew. Every time that you leave the vehicle, you take on your counter form. Real benefit for the carriers is that if you have 2 of these, normally you can only carry half squad size, so it's like a 2-person, 3-5-person kind of vehicle. If, however, we had 2 of them, a good rule you can do is if your units dismount, they can come together and they can turn into a full squad without a leader. Now, they also can do the reverse. They can break back into their half squad components so that they can mount up in their respective carriers. So a lot of flexibility with carrier crews. Typically, you don't have both. You don't have an inherent crew and a half squad. The half squad is your crew. So once this vehicle has been abandoned, then you do have to put on your abandoned counters just so that they know that you're no longer having units aboard that. Once you reoccupy your vehicle, obviously you can take this away. And the same goes with scrounging. If you want to take the weaponry and can do your attack, make sure that you have your scrounge on with your abandon to indicate that you can't do it again, right? The only carriers that have inherent crews are things that have ordnance with them. So again, in this case, let's look at a British, here we go, a carrier like this, with the 3-inch mortar. These vehicles here do have inherent crews, and therefore they would not be using the half squad crew mix, just the normal vehicle crew counters that they have. So that's a slight difference between some of the weapon platform carriers and your standard carrier that you're probably going to see. Now, because of the small case of the vehicle, you can see the little picture here. It doesn't offer a lot of protection. You do get the +2 CE TM, but you're always going to be unbuttoned. You're always going to be crew exposed. You're never going to be buttoned up, regardless of what happens to you. So even if you're stunned or pinned, normally that entails buttoning up. You don't have to in this case. You're always going to be crew exposed, which again has its penalties because you can always be attacked by small arms fire. So you're more vulnerable in a carrier than you would be in, say, a half track. All right, let's look at some examples then how you might want to use your half track. So this is a scenario I played twice. Both times really poor showing from the Germans, and it was one of the reasons why I came up with this video, because I have no idea how to use these. Reading, I don't have access to the Recon by Fire article, which apparently is quite good. I wish I could get that magazine, but we'll see how that works out. I'm not paying $80 shipping for a $35 magazine. And I wasn't sure how to use these things, so they didn't do well. I ended up, let's move some of these Americans aside. This scenario, by the way, is Vok am Rhein number 10 from Volume 2 of the scenario pack from Lone Canuck Publishing, and it's called Line in the Sand. So we're just going to get rid of some of these guys here. So in one case, I had a 747 back here with a bazooka, and this guy is a superhero. I was unable to get him. I tried to overrun him with a tank. He ended up killing the tank because I broke down. I put in another tank beside him. He street fought that one. He ambushed it, destroyed that. Then I moved in a half track, and because of his triple fired, halved, what have you, he caused damage to the half track. So you have to be careful with what you charge with your vehicles. The 747 with the bazooka is not going to be your best target, even if he's on the road and you want to try and overrun. Again, you're attacking a 747 with the bazooka, so you're probably not going to be living very long. In this particular mission, what probably should have happened is I should have, for one, I did not button up, or I did not crew expose my stacks. They were all buttoned up. Right, I had all my infantry in buttoned up on the half track. I was sitting over here. This guy actually went berserk from this house, managed to charge all the way over to my half track, and because I was buttoned up, I was unable to respond. Basically, I could have used the 3 firepower AMG, which I did, but it's a berserk unit. It's not going to do much. However, the 5-for-8 with the LMG and a leader in the back of a half track, because I mistakenly buttoned them up at the wrong time, were unable to prevent this guy from entering this location. And luckily for me, all he did was mobilize the vehicle before he died. But he could have very easily wiped out a half track and the contents with one berserk 747. So again, depending what your enemy is determines how close you get. Bazooka has a range of 4. Even with a base 4, you take away 2 for move. Snake Eyes, I mean, if he hits, he's going to hit. And this is only a half track, so it's going to die if this bazooka actually gets a round off. So be careful how you apply your half tracks depending on the forces. If we don't give this guy a bazooka and it's a 747 in the woods, for example, maybe you want to get closer and then you're still protected by your CE +2 bonus, maybe some other terrain modifiers, and it lets you get nice and close so you can dismount to do your business if you want to dismount. In this particular case, assuming none of these other units existed, you may just want to move into the hex, thereby restricting this guy's fire. All he can do is fire at this unit and back and forth, while the rest of your maneuver elements are doing what they're doing. So You do have the ability for the bypass freeze sleeves with a half track. Again, maybe not the best use for it because it's likely going to be destroyed if it stays too long, especially against 747 or something of equal strength, high firepower. The question then becomes, what do you do with your half track? So let's bring this guy up as well. So here we have 2 half tracks, a squad in each, a couple of LMGs in each. And if we want to form a fire group, remember we have to be unbuttoned. And the crew is always crew exposed anyways, unless you actually put a physical button up counter on it. So if we want a fire group, we're going to add a 3 AMG. We're going to add the 5. Now this could be assault fire depending on the range. Let's put them here. Maybe even give them a trench to hide in. And we're within our 4 assault fire, so we can do that as well. So assuming this is the movement phase, you want to do some kind of bounding fire, or your advancing fire phase, you want to stop here and fire. You can fire your AMG for 3. That would be halved. You do your assault fire for your 548, which would be 2.5, round up, or sorry, add 1, then round up for a 4. And then you have your LMG for another 1.5. So between your AMG, your LMG, and the squad, you have 7 firepower with a 9.1 liter. So it's not too bad that you've just moved whatever distance you did, and you're attacking a trench with a 6 firepower attack with a -1 liter. And because this vehicle as well is crew exposed, manning the anti-air, you could fire group with this and do another 6 firepower as well. So right now we have 12 firepower, being able to attack a unit inside a foxhole. Obviously you can lead or direct, but you won't get the bonus. But still, having this kind of extra firepower on the move, it's quite lethal. So you want to engage to some degree with your half tracks, but just bear in mind that your vulnerability is still there. So if the 747 wants to defend first fire on the vehicle, I just rolled that, which is the way I roll. That's how I do things. Even a +2 is going to hurt because we're now at a 4 on the IFT. I just rolled a 2 morale check. And because they are crew exposed, I have to take a morale check for the crew. Now, if they fail, which they did, they're going to become stunned. Remember that for direct fire, they become stunned. So they're automatically going to button up. Now we do and we put this on the vehicle itself, not on the passengers. Now the passengers do their own 2 morale checks. We'll start with the 9.1. So he passes, he breaks. And the 548 as well is fine. Now they got to take a pending task check because the leader broke, and they're fine too. So this, you can tell what kind of rolls they normally get. So in this particular case, this 747 first fired, and he's able to cause some damage. So now these guys are under the stun effect. So at the end of the turn, the white counters come off. This one gets flipped over. From now on, this half track will be susceptible to this +1 for everything. And we do have other units here. So if we go to the next German turn, whatever happened. This guy's still around. We want to move. Even though the leader is not rallied at this point, maybe even still under DM because he got fired on again, we can still continue moving closer to the enemy, maybe even doing an overrun against our little fearless American paratrooper in there. So again, because the crew has its own status from the passengers, they could suffer different results, and or vice versa. Now, if now say this half track was actually parked in the woods with the units on board, and we have an American mortar here. Right, sitting here in the foxhole, and our 747 wants to fire onto this guy here. We do our to-hit roll. All right, we get a hit because remember, mortars always fire area. It's a base 7. Just something to remember. We have to worry about airburst effects. Now, airburst effects are going to negate, in part, our armor. It's going to go from a +2 to a +1 because airbursts are always a -1. So on the IFT, we get that. We give ourselves a +1 to that. So we're safe for now. However, if I had rolled poorly, there's a very real chance that the crew itself would take a morale check. And if they fail that morale check because of the airburst effect, like that, then they would become potentially broken and or could be pinned. They could even be KIA'd and killed. So in this particular case, let's assume that they failed their morale check. They would be replaced with a broken crew. All right. And in the rally phase, or excuse me, the route phase, these guys would have to leave the half track and they'd have to route under the half track itself. Whether or not the passengers are in that same boat depends on what happens to the crew. In this particular case, the vehicle is now abandoned, so we must put on our abandoned note. All right. Assuming these guys broke as well, let's just break everybody, why not? They will now have to leave the vehicle because it's been abandoned. So they're going to join the half squad or the crew outside the vehicle. Again, this is going to use up all of your route phase move for the initial route that they break. And it's not until subsequent route phases that they'll be able to move away from that. So once more, if the crew of the vehicle is broken, they have to abandon the vehicle. And that means any passengers have to abandon as well. You basically, if it's an abandoned truck, you cannot just sit there parked on your butts. You're going to have to jump out as well, especially if you're broken. In the next turn, say the crew rallies, they can reoccupy the vehicle. All right, the crew counter goes away. We're now occupied. We still have our broken units here, and assuming at some point that they rally, right, say our units rally themselves in the next turn, then they can reoccupy it in their movement phase again. So just remember that if a crew is impacted by things like a KIA or a failed morale check because of things like airburst or height advantage, that kind of thing, then what happens to the crew and the passengers might be different. If your crew is killed, then this vehicle is permanently abandoned and any passengers will have to vacate as quickly as possible. So we've already talked about basically how to attack with a half track. Remember that, as with most things, you want to have combined arms whenever possible, some kind of close armor protection, maybe even dismounted troops, if you want to move closer to the enemy. All right, if you're just half tracks and you've got a crap load of 747s in defensive positions of various degrees of bazookas and what have you, you might be better off staying out of bazooka range and dismounting and doing your attacks the normal way. Again, if the vehicle is destroyed, barring a flame, you might have a chance of survival, but if it's flamed or if it's destroyed in close combat, the passengers are gone as well. So you're going to have to make a certain risk assessment, whether or not you get really close and suffer losing everything, or do you dismount from a distance. Half tracks can do their contributing thing, either offering some kind of armored assault protection and still using their AMGs as a fire group, or they just are troop transports. Once they deposit the troops, then they can move it away. Again, don't forget that typically these units can scrounge the LMGs from the vehicle. So in this case, we have the AMG. We could always put on our scrounge counter and we'll pick up an extra light LMG that we can use. And this vehicle will always be without its anti-air from that time forward. But it gives you extra firepower on the ground. Half tracks can be quite useful and quite handy if used properly. Just bear in mind, because they're relatively weak armored, only ones, maybe zeros, they're gonna not. It doesn't take a lot of damage to impact it. Again, you look at a thing like a bazooka. A kill on a bazooka is a 16 for Baz 44. So you're looking at a 16 kill. You've got one armor factor. So anything but a dud round, a 12, means that your vehicle is going to be destroyed and maybe even a flame. And once more, if your vehicle is destroyed and ablaze, its crew and passengers don't have any chance of survival. So again, the eggs in one basket. So depending what you're attacking will probably determine how close your half tracks get. Don't be afraid to throw them in the mix of things, however, if you're fighting less elite troops. All right, and that was a quick overview of Tactics 101 on half tracks and carriers. Again, quite versatile. They do have weaknesses, especially in the late war with increased firepower. Again, a machine gun has a kill of 4, maybe even a 5. You throw in some range modifiers. It's quite easy to kill a half track with a machine gun. So you're going to have to bear in mind what your enemy OB is consisting of, determining how close you get to them. But definitely, it's one of the better uses for carrying troops. Better than the truck, better than jeeps and such, because of the armor afforded to you in the approach. So, how do you use half tracks? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm really curious about tactics on this. As I said at the beginning, I played this scenario line in the sand twice. Both ended up horribly for the Germans. On the first one, I was too cautious with my half tracks. The second one, I was too aggressive. So there's got to be some balance, and that is primarily determined by the terrain and who you're fighting. So just bear those two things in mind, and hopefully your half tracks work for you in your assault. See you guys next video. Bye bye.